Welcome back, guys, to our third and final part of this lesson on science and religion. You'll notice I'm starting with the same slide we've started all three with. This quote that you copied down will be part of the assignment for today's lesson. Here it is, in fact. Relatively short today again, so just three interesting things. You know how to do this already. And here's the big grade, okay? It's the big final push, if you will, for this science and religion project to write a short essay, 3 to 5 paragraphs. Remember, for our purposes, a paragraph will be about 5 sentences. And I want you to relate the Collins video, the Einstein quote, and the John Paul II quote. Okay, I want to know what you think they mean collectively. You can do a little analysis of each of them in your essay, but I'm really looking for, in general, what do they have in common? Okay, so don't get bogged down in details about each of these things. As a reminder, the Collins video is found in the third quarter folder in Schoology. Remember, these past quarters are found in the late work folder. Okay, so you have the Collins video, but you already watched it. So if you remember it, or if you have your notes, you don't really need to watch it again unless you want to. It's there. The Einstein quote I'm referencing is the one you did for part 2. Science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. And the St. John Paul II quote is the one in the beginning of today's video and all the previous videos. You should have copied that down on your first part 1 assignment. Okay, so again, I'm looking for, in general, these three things, at least in my reading, though you're free to disagree, are saying sort of the same thing. What is that? Okay, obviously, if you have any questions, send me an email, whynes@sjci.com, and we can work that out. Okay, but a little bigger assignment here. So let's begin with our sciences today. Now I'm focusing in just in a little subset of science called rocket science. Now, if it weren't for my fear of a copyright strike, as they call it on YouTube channels, I would have included that song by Shania Twain here. That don't impress me much. Some of you might know it. And she has that line in there. So you're a rocket scientist. That don't impress me much. Well, I would have played it and sort of objected to it because rocket science is quite impressive, isn't it? It's become a saying in English, right? Rocket science is sort of the way we speak about anything that's complicated. And the negative phrase, it's not rocket science, meaning it's easy. So yeah, it is kind of impressive. I could have done this for any branch of science. You know, we could have done something on astronomy or something on biology or physics. I just chose this particular area because of that saying. So we'll dive down a little deeper in this little subset of science today. First to note, there are 35 lunar craters named for Jesuits. Jesuits, of course, being the religious order that teaches at the other school at Canisius College, and of which Pope Francis is a member. Okay, like we have Christian brothers at our school, the Jesuits are a religious order. But because of their interest historically in astronomy, 35 craters of the moon have Jesuit names, Christian Catholic names. What you see in this slide, guys, is a picture, obviously, of a swastika in one corner and a paperclip in the other. They may not seem immediately obvious why they're connected. Operation Paperclip was launched by the United States as World War II is ending, and it's clear that Germany is going to be conquered. We were in a rush to bring over the best German minds, the great scientists, for example. The Russians were doing the same thing. In fact, the Nazis themselves were tracking down some of their own scientists to kill them so that the ideas in their heads wouldn't go into Allied hands. Well, the United States won the big catch of the war, the Great German scientist Werner von Braun. And you'll see here that he becomes an important figure in the history of the United States, particularly as it relates to our space race. When he died in 1977, his very simple tomb simply says Psalms 19, verse 1. Nothing about his amazing scientific accomplishments or his great inventions or his political clout. No. It ends with that great quote from Psalm 19, "The heavens declare the greatness of the Lord." Such a beautiful way. And this is a very simple, elegant reminder of how religion wins, shall we say, in the end. Right? All the other accomplishments of life pass away. But in the end, it's this deeper, bigger, huge, eternal view that marks a man. So here is Mr. Science himself at the time, buried with a simple tomb, Psalms 19, verse 1. In 1968, now I was born in 63, so this is my lifetime, though I was a young kid. Apollo 8, you see the guys here. Look how manly they look. Man, you can see the hair on their arms. Quite impressive, right? They were the first to leave Earth's orbit, and the first to see Earth rise. Well, what do they broadcast back to the United States, and I think also to the world, but I'm not sure. But here is the passage, and it's going to take a little time here. I want you to listen to it carefully and to understand what they thought was appropriate to send back to the United States when they had this amazing first time ever experience. Listen, it will take some time.
We are now approaching lunar sunrise, and for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning was the first day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters. Let it divide the waters from the waters." And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning was the second day. God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. God saw that it was good. And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good earth.
Now, isn't that amazing, guys, that they thought the most appropriate thing to send back to the country, to the world, was the creation account in the book of Genesis. Mentioning of God, of course, and reading the Bible as they're up there. And from a religious perspective, at least, yeah, that makes perfect sense. How could you outdo the classic creation story that all of us, at least in the West, sort of know? So keep that in mind. The first words spoken after the first people ever to have seen Earth as a whole was from the book of Genesis. Apollo 11, a few years later, very well known. Of course, the first humans on the moon. You know that from your history books. I remember huge event, of course, in my lifetime. Again, I was quite young, but of course, a major scientific accomplishment, kind of a major patriotic moment too, of course, for America. But here's what happened right before the men went off out of the spaceship, whatever that's called, Apollo lunar module, I think it's called. I'm going to give you some time to read this. Should just take a few seconds. So one of the astronauts, Buzz Aldrin, was a Presbyterian elder, I believe, and you can see what he did. He had a 3x5 card with him in space. He's got the quote there of John's Gospel, I am the vine, you are the branches, whoever remains in me and I in him will bear much fruit, for you can do nothing without me. Now it doesn't say here, and I haven't seen any interviews, but my guess is that he chose that quote because of the last section. You can do nothing without me. That makes perfect sense from, shall we say, his vantage point. And what does he do then? He has communion on the moon. You see all the details there. Again, look this up, guys, because I think, it's one of those things that's certainly not going to make the history books, and religion is always downplayed. We've talked about this point before, but this is true. It's reality. Before they leave the lunar module, they have communion. You'll see that his words there in the second paragraph, what he would have said, I'm not sure about this, guys, so look it up. I don't believe they were broadcast. I don't believe they actually said these. He said it, but I'm not sure that NASA broadcast it. By this point, so between Apollo 8 and Apollo 11, you can kind of gauge where the mood was about religion. I think NASA, again, I'm not certain, so check it up, check on this, but NASA didn't feel comfortable broadcasting religious stuff by 1969. So you can kind of date when this decline in, say, public religiosity takes place in America. But here it is, Buzz Aldrin having communion, reading the Bible on the moon. Let's move up in some dates now. You may not have heard of this name, Arno Penzias, but of course he's a Nobel Prize winner, as you can see there. Very famous people who are into astronomy would certainly know this guy and his background radiation discovery, which he thought was a mistake, by the way, at the time. Fascinating account. But I love this quote of his. He says, the best, and he's referring to the Big Bang here, the best data we have are exactly what I would have predicted had I had nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, that would be the Torah, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole. You could guess that I particularly like how he singled out the Psalms. That tells me something, doesn't it, guys? It tells me that this is a guy who's probably tuned in. I don't know his religious background or anything, but he's probably tuned into religious practice. In other words, he knows how important the Psalms are to those of us who are into, say, Judaism and Christianity. It's sort of our go-to song book, as we've said many times. But Arno Penzias, we're now into the 70s, guys. Okay, so keep in mind, because sometimes you'll get this view, maybe it's your view, that of course these old timers that we looked at in part 1 and part 2, of course they were religious because everybody was religious back then. Well, as you will see, that's certainly not the case. All right, we'll keep moving up in history now. Here, these are 2 separate photos, by the way. You'll see the blue bar separating the International Space Station on, you can see the ship there as on one side, but the others here is a Russian Orthodox priest blessing one of the missions going up there. You see that big chalice looking thing here in the picture. That's the holy water, meant to imitate the holy water of baptism, the font that's used at baptism. And the priest here is definitely sprinkling this cosmonaut, the Russian. You could tell by his epaulette there, his shoulder with the Russian flag. Lots of holy water, kissing the crucifix. And presumably, although I don't know, the American, remember it's a shared international space station, the American probably will do the same thing. I'm not sure. But just think of this in history, guys. We've talked about it briefly in class elsewhere that, when I was a kid, the Soviet Union was atheistic. That's why in the 50s we added under God to our pledge, and we made sure that the motto of the United States, in God we trust, was officially declared so. We did that to separate America, the U.S., from the atheist Soviet Union. Well, who would imagine that you would see the day where the Russian Orthodox Church is so powerful again under Putin and, whatever the political system is that you want to call the current Russian Federation. But here they are being blessed. Now it's interesting because in the space race, Nikita Khrushchev, at one point, there's a story that's told, of course he was an atheist, that one of the cosmonauts got into space, and when he came back, they interviewed him and asked him, "Did you see God?" And he said, "No, I've been there. There clearly is no God," right? As if God were somehow something you would see in space. But now to see what has happened, where cosmonauts are literally blessed by Russian Orthodox priests before they begin their mission, is absolutely astonishing to people like me. Keep in mind, your experience at this point in time in the U.S. is that religion is declining. See, you haven't seen that full arc as I have seen. Well, we used to think it was dead in Russia, and then it comes roaring back to life today. These are two separate International Space Station missions. Okay, they're not at the same time, but I just want you to see the role of religion still there. The single guy there with the full-length Valium icon we know is from Finland. If you know your icons at all, that icon is to Finland what Our Lady of Guadalupe is to Mexico. It immediately tells me he's probably Finland's first cosmonaut or something like that, associated with Finland. On the other side, we have the crew there, including at least one American. You see where the arrow is a prayer corner. Now, I don't know, guys, and I'd love to hear from any of you if you want to do research on this. I don't know if this is a permanent part of the International Space Station or if it was just this one mission. I'm not sure. Okay, you might want to get back to me if you discover it. But at least at this one mission, you see these icons. A place to pray. Again, hard to believe that what was once the communist, atheistic Soviet Union now sends people into the International Space Center with icons. Okay? You're not going to see that in the history books, are you guys? Of course. That's why we're learning it now. Onto America, right? Here's just one example. I could have picked many of an American. He was in the International Space Station during the 2013-2014 mission. And you'll see he had just become a Catholic. He's from Texas. And he had a kind of agreement made with his bishop, with his diocese, to bring communion. Communion is extremely important to Catholics, right? He brings communion with him, consecrated hosts, into space, enough for each of the Sundays that he's up there. And if you look at the last paragraph, it was extremely, extremely important to me. Again, scientists, in this case astronauts, don't lose their faith, right? They're keeping their faith even today. This is a little aside here because of our St. Joe's connection with the Vatican Advanced Technology Telescope. The Vatican, I believe, has two astronomical observatories. This one I think it's near Tucson, not sure, definitely in Arizona. And one in Italy, I think in the Alps. But our brother Peter, who you may recall from the beginning of the year, he now left and went to New Jersey, but Brother Peter did some of his doctoral work at this telescope. Okay, so we do have a kind of St. Joe's connection there. For you science guys, I listed just off of Wikipedia some of the things that were quote-unquote discovered here by this telescope. I'm not sure how those rank. I don't know if they're super important or if they're minor things, but there they are if you're into astronomy. Let's talk about what is clearly the most prestigious science award in the world, and arguably the most prestigious award of any kind in the world, the Nobel Prize. Alfred Nobel is interesting religiously. He grows up as an agnostic. Then in his Paris years, he becomes a Lutheran and attends services regularly. And then later in life becomes an atheist. Okay, I'm not going to speak about his religion other than that. That's not really my point. But to talk about the prize. Now, these guys become the creme de la creme, right, of the geniuses, right? Who are the smart people today? Well, if you win a Nobel Prize, that kind of seals the deal, doesn't it? Let's keep in mind, though, that not all disciplines have Nobel Prize categories, right? For example, you cannot win a Nobel Prize in architecture. Okay? You don't win a Nobel Prize in music. You don't win a Nobel Prize in religion. Those areas, among others, have their own awards. So don't think that every discipline is even capable of winning a Nobel Prize. Not true, okay? But this may come as a surprise to you, again, because the current view is that, oh, the more scientific you get, the more smart you get, whatever, the less likely you are to become religious. Well, that may be true in general, right? But it's not always the case. And here are some people who have won Nobel Prizes. Many of these are the Nobel Peace Prize winners, by the way, who became Christians. I put an asterisk next to those who became Catholic. Some of the names you should probably know at your age. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, for example, and Boris Pasternak certainly are very important figures. You will note a disproportionate number of them come over from Judaism. Be careful with that, though, guys. These were almost certainly not, I don't know in every case, but almost certainly not practicing Jews, okay? These would have been ethnic Jewish people who maybe made their bar mitzvah when they were 13 or something, but since Judaism refers both to a religion and a religious practice, and also to an ethnicity, you have to be careful doing this. My guess is that most of them marked from Judaism were actually agnostics. Here's an interesting sidelight because it happens in my life. The scientist Jerome Lejeune and his team, although I think it was mostly him, were the ones who mapped out, that's probably the wrong word, but the ones who discovered trisomy 21, that is the genetic origin of Down syndrome. And this was a major finding, of course, as you can imagine, right? But the scientist here, Dr. Lejeune, made, shall we say, a fatal political mistake, and many people say this is why he did not win the Nobel Prize, even though his discovery certainly would have made him eligible to. He said that he was very much afraid that his discovery was going to be used to kill Down syndrome babies in the womb. And he turned out to be absolutely correct, sadly. So here he is, this guy making this huge scientific discovery, but also recognizing that people are going to use it not to treat the disease, not to kind of work on genetic manipulation to fix it or any of that, but rather to eliminate people with Down syndrome, now through abortion or whatever. To this day, of course, many pregnant women get tested for Down syndrome babies, and many opt not to have them. He foresaw that, and it's sad in many ways. Great great scientific discovery, but he also saw the kind of chilling ramifications that turned out to be true. You will note that he's already on the first step to being canonized a saint. Kind of unusual. Notice he dies not that much sooner than you were born, right? 94. And that's very quick. So he was a holy man in his life as well. Let's move up to 2012. Here's Brian Kobilka and his wife, active in the Stanford University Catholic Community Newman Center. The G protein coupled receptors research, somebody's going to have to tell me what that means, but it was impressive enough for him to win a Nobel Prize. But active in his parish, his Newman Center at Stanford. Again, making the point here, guys, that it's not just these ancient scientists who had to be religious. No, many of the Nobel Prize winners today are also religious people. Now, let's be careful. I'm not saying that all scientists do become religious. Not claiming that, right? I'm just claiming that you cannot say that science and religion are mutually exclusive. There's plenty of examples here of how famous Nobel Prize winning scientists are also men of faith. They don't see a problem with religion and science working together. Talking still about the Nobel Prize, in this case the Nobel Peace Prize, you'll see about every 10 years, on average, some of the great religious figures of the time win the award. You might not know the first one, but that was the pastor that Alfred Nobel had during his Lutheran stage, shall we say, the middle part of his life when he was doing Christianity. 47. Notice that the Society of Friends of the U.S. and the United Kingdom, also known as the Quakers, this is right after the war, right after World War II. And of course the world is starting to say, boy, this idea of having peace. Remember, the Quakers are a peace-loving group and not violent at all. They get recognized as a group to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Schweitzer, you probably know, famous scientist, Bible scholar, musician. 1958, Father Dominic Pier, not well known, but he's doing work with refugees still after the Second World War. 64, Reverend King, we talked about separately. 79, Mother Teresa, I remember her winning this. I had that letter that I would get just a few years later, 1981. Reverend Desmond Tutu for his work against apartheid. And then Reverend, this is a Catholic bishop at the end, for his work for peace in East Timor. Religious people who have won the Nobel Peace Prize. Let's move up to 2018. Most recent, I believe. There might be a 2019. Somebody could check me on this, but last time I looked, 2018 Nobel Peace Prize went to Dr. Denis Mukwege. If you don't know why he's doing it, I don't want to say it on video, but man, this guy certainly deserves it. He is restoring life, shall we say, to women under remarkably tragic situations. Okay. And he is also a pastor. In fact, the picture you have there is in front of his parish. He's not only a great medical doctor, gynecologist, obstetrician, I believe as well, but a Pentecostal pastor. And as you'll see from the quote here, he will commonly say the reason he does what he does is because of his faith in Jesus Christ. That's 2018, guys. This guy, scientist, doctor, Nobel Prize winner, has no problem thinking that religion and science go together. Finally, in a different vein, but I didn't know where else to put this, and I do think you should know it, the United Nations has recognized the work of our brothers. So, LaSallian Schools has this nice little quote here. Not really a science thing per se, but I wanted you to know that even a group not known for their great religiosity, namely the United Nations, have recognized the work of the Christian brothers throughout the world. So that's it. All three of our lessons kind of complicated and long. I know that. I appreciate the time you spent listening to me and learning, but it is things you need to know before you go off to college and you just accept what people say. I want you to go back to the actual sources. Well, here's what we're asking for today. I mentioned in the beginning 3 interesting things from the presentation, and then think of this final part as all 3 parts of our lessons. What are these 3 things? Collins video, Einstein quote, St. John Paul II. What are they saying collectively about science and its relationship to religion? Any problems? Email me. Any questions? Email me. All right, spend your time doing it. I'll put the deadlines for all these things in the actual assignment instructions and how much points they're worth, etc. So again, thanks for listening to me, guys. Have a great day.